The African continent has the worst power supply in the world. This is due to a long period of neglect by the leaders in making the necessary investments to get the much-needed capacity the sector needs to build. A report from the International Energy Association shows that about 25 million people are now living without electricity today as compared to the pandemic. This low energy access hampers the rate of sustainable development and also causes socio-economic problems. In 2018, the number of people without access to electricity reached 880 million. However, 2019 saw some improvement, with a reduction to about 770 million. For Africa to see a reasonable amount of improvement in its power sector, about $350 billion needs to be invested between now and 2030, according to Mackenzie Limited. In today's video, we will look at the 10 African countries facing the worst electricity access in 2023. You can't imagine the country with the worst power supply at the moment, so make sure you stay tuned till the end. Hold on tight as we're about to take off. 10. Mozambique. Mozambique has undertaken substantial efforts in recent years to electrify the country. From 5% in 2001 to 24% in 2017 and 31% in 2020, the electrification rate has increased. Yet there is still a limited amount of access to power, mostly in rural areas. In 2020, 75% of people living in cities had access to electricity, compared to 5% of people living in rural areas. In both urban and rural areas, 17.5 million Mozambicans still do not have access to electricity. An inadequate transmission and distribution network, a lack of finance, and administrative restrictions are all contributing issues. Despite the government of Mozambique extensively subsidizing the electricity prices, the average home user cannot pay them. Mozambique has 31% of electricity access. 9. Liberia. Data coming from the World Bank shows that only 27.53% of Liberia's population had access to electricity. The civil war in Liberia, which ended in 2003, had a devastating effect on the power sector. Less than 20% of the people have access to the power supply in the country's capital, Monrovia. Liberia's access to electricity is very low, with power supplies reaching only 34% of urban areas and almost no rural areas. Liberia's state-owned electricity corporation announced in 2022 that there was going to be a series of power supply interruptions. This was due to a reduction in power generation caused by the decrease in water levels at the Mount Coffee hydroelectric power plant. Liberia can look towards renewable energy with its vast resources in hydro, biomass, and solar, which can be used effectively for power generation. Liberia has 28% electricity access. 8. Sierra Leone. The Sierra Leone power sector has been facing significant problems ranging from transmission and distribution failures, insufficient generation capacity, high technical and commercial losses, and also a lack of institutional framework and regulation that has been hindering the much-needed growth the energy system needs. Only 26% of Sierra Leone's population has access to electricity. This poor access to electricity hinders the delivery of modern healthcare, education, jobs, and poverty reduction. The lack of information on how to go about electrification is what causes decision-makers to fail in correctly planning electrification, especially in the country's rural areas. The World Bank in 2021 granted $50 million to Sierra Leone to enable them to improve their institutional capacity and enhance commercial management of the sector. They have 26% of electricity access. 7. Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso's power sector is facing a high cost of electricity production. With a population of about 19.7 million people, only 18.9% of the total population have access to electricity. Most of the energy supply comes from biomass, which accounts for about 80% of the total power generated. Thermal fossil fuels and hydropower are heavily relied on for power generation. The country has 28 fossil fuel power stations and 4 hydropower stations that account for 70% of total electricity generation. The government has set a target of 60% power coverage by 2027, with 90% of the people in urban areas having access to electricity and at least 30% for those in rural areas. In 2021, the World Bank approved $168 million for the electrification of 120,000 households using solar energy, and its government also received support for the implementation of its large-scale solar and rural electrification projects. They have 19% electricity access. 6. Niger. The rural residents are the most affected, with as little as 4% of those in the rural area having access to the power supply through a national utility. Electricity supply increased by 0.28% from 2019 to 2020, making the general access to electricity reach about 19.25% nationwide. Programs like HASC, which means light, are meant to increase power supply by deploying solar mini-grids in rural areas. The project is also aimed at bringing the total supply of electricity to 30% by 2026 and 80% by 2035. Niger has 19% electricity access. 5. The Democratic Republic of Congo. They have one of the lowest rates of access to electricity, with less than 15% of their rural residents having access to light. Years of war have damaged social infrastructure, and the rate of electrification is outpacing population growth. The country still has a long way to go to reach its target of 65% power supply by 2025. Available data from the World Bank shows that only 19.1% of the total population in the Democratic Republic of the Congo have access to electricity. Due to its widespread population, the country's national grid does not meet the needs of most of the population. There is a need for the adoption of an off-grid solar solution for households in the rural and pre-rural areas of the country. The government, along with its international partners, like Sweden, is making an effort to expand the Beyond the Grid Fund for Africa program, which is aimed at creating access to renewable energy for people in rural areas who are feeling most of the effects of poor power supply. They have a 19% electricity access. Hope you are learning something from this video. Like and subscribe to the New Tourist channel, and do not forget to turn on notifications so you get notified whenever we upload videos like this. Let's continue. 4. Malawi. Despite recent improvements in electricity access in Malawi, only 15% of the population have access to electricity. According to the Malawi energy policy, approximately 85% of energy comes from biomass, which is largely exploited in an unsustainable manner. Petroleum imports account for 3.5% of total energy consumption, while hydroelectricity accounts for 2.3%. The goal of Malawian policymakers is to expand the availability of clean cooking options and electricity nationwide. However, in order to increase demand and support the expansion of generation and transmission, Malawi must address the low ability to pay for electricity in both urban and rural areas. It is widely acknowledged that the use of wood fuel for heating, cooking, and lighting has different effects on men and women. Therefore, policies intended to decrease deforestation and the market for charcoal should take this into account. However, these policies must explicitly support increased rural access to electricity. 3. Central African Republic. Central Africa is often left out when it comes to planning Africa's energy transformation. This is because the country is notorious for its insecurity and coups that occur regularly. Power generation is at a low point, with only 15.47% of the population having access to electricity. The lack of electricity supply made the treatment of patients during the COVID-19 pandemic very difficult. The World Bank, through its subsidiaries, has approved $138 million to be granted to the electricity sector's Strengthen and Access project. The Green Climate Fund is also expected to contribute $30 million. All these investments in the country's power sector are expected to reap some benefits in the years to come. They have a 15% electricity access. 2. Chad. Chad has been unable to improve energy access and reduce poverty, and a major limitation is the power sector. The country only generates 314 megawatts of installed capacity, which is meant to serve 17 million people. Chad is ranked number 2 on this list because its access to electricity covers only 11% of its total population. The nation has abundant natural resources and is also known for having the 10th largest oil reserves in Africa. There is also huge potential for solar and wind energy. The World Bank approved a $295 million grant from the International Development Association to enable the country to expand its access to energy. This program is expected to bring electricity to 700 schools and 850 medical centers, especially in rural areas. Another program, the Energy Access Scale-Up Project, is expected to improve the country's access to electricity by expanding main grids and mini-grids, as well as introducing solar systems. Chad has 11% electricity access. 1. South Sudan. The country has a population of 11 million people. The leaders of the country have been building the electric sector from scratch because of the war that has erupted in the country. Sudan has one of the worst power supplies in the world and is ranked as the worst in Africa, as only 7% of the country's population has access to electricity, according to the World Bank. Those connected to the power supply usually experience blackouts, causing people to rely on standby generators for their power needs. The lack of transmission facilities and infrastructure has limited private sector development, thereby reducing the growth of the Sudanese power sector. South Sudan is expected to build a nuclear power plant by 2030, which will fill most of the energy gaps and create opportunities for the power sector. In recent times, the top 20 least electrified countries in the world were located in Africa. We have also seen a huge disparity in access to electricity between urban and rural dwellers. In the sub-Saharan region, 8 out of 10 people don't have access to electricity from recent data. Using solar energy is an attractive source of power generation, with countries located in the sub-Saharan region having huge solar potential. South Sudan has 7% of electricity access. Despite this disparity in the power supply around the world, Africa will see continuous growth in the future as different government policies are being implemented and more people are beginning to access more electricity. We have come to the end of this video. Let us know what you think about these countries in the comment section. Also, like and subscribe to the new tourist channel, and do not forget to turn on notifications so you get notified whenever we upload important videos like this. Thanks for watching and see you in our next video.